Well, we are now in the fourth week of our message series, a series that we are calling Staying Power. It's a series about how to grow in your faith as a follower of Jesus Christ and how to keep growing in your faith, because when we are alive, we should be growing. This is a series all about spiritual growth. And we have been arguing, and we will continue to argue in the weeks ahead, that spiritual growth should be something we desire for its own sake, but also because it actually places us at a distinct advantage in many other aspects of our life beyond the four walls of this church. For example, spiritual growth is something that empowers you. It empowers you to identify your purpose and to accomplish what God has created you to do. And God has indeed created you for a specific purpose. Spiritual growth can enable you. It enables you to become the best version of you, the person that you want to be. We all seek that. Spiritual growth can help us attain it. Spiritual growth encourages you. It encourages you to love the people around you the way you want to love them, not the way you sometimes fail, as is true of us all. Spiritual growth equips you to love and care for yourself in a way that's not selfish, but selfless. In fact, we could say your most important in life could be to grow spiritually. It can actually be more important than your job, your career, your relationships, friendships, your marriage, your children. It can be more important than all of these because it can determine success and fruitfulness in all of those other areas of your life. They, in a certain sense, depend on your spiritual growth. You depend on your spiritual growth. And that's why we should be open to and interested in spiritual growth. But being open to growth is not enough. There is a second part. And the second part is really the crucial part. Because anyone can be open to growth, but to actually grow, you've got to make a commitment. We grow spiritually by the commitments we make and keep. And staying power, the title of this series, staying power is absolutely necessary for us in our spiritual growth, because if we reflect for a moment on our life and the things that occupy our mind and our heart as we go from one day to the next, there are many obstacles to growing spiritually. Think about the typical day in your life, from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to sleep. Isn't it true that almost everything in that day, the appointments you have to keep, the conversations you have, the people you meet, the responsibilities you have to fulfill, isn't it true that almost every one of those is pressing on your mind and on your heart, occupying your attention in a way that your spiritual life just really isn't doing? Everything in the world feels more important, more urgent, more real than your spiritual life. Everything gets in the way of making any kind of spiritual commitment. Everything, in a certain sense, we could say, conspires against that commitment. It's challenging. And even more challenging, it takes time. In the same way that you cannot accomplish anything of value, anything worthwhile in this life, quickly, there is no way to microwave your spiritual maturity. You can't do it in a day. Spiritual maturity, on the other hand, requires a long obedience in the same direction, making a commitment and keeping it. This series is about that. And it's also about the specific steps that you need to take to make those commitments as commitments, and indeed to keep them. And we have, for our purposes, identified 5 commitments. I put up one finger and I said 5 commitments. 5 commitments, that's a little better. 5 commitments that we believe are essential for people to grow as a follower of Christ. And conveniently for us, they form an acronym. The first letter of each of them forms the word STEPS. They are steps to spiritual growth, and together they form the word STEPS. And the first is, at least alphabetically or by the spelling of the word, the first is serving. Serving is a profound step that you can take in spiritual growth, a commitment that you can make to serve in ministry or in missions. The next is tithing, tithing and giving, supporting the mission that Christ gave his church. Next, engaging in Christian community through a small group. Practicing prayer and sacraments. Finally, sharing your faith. Now, I said finally to that last one. In fact, there's no particular order to these steps. You can take up any one of them at any point in time, perhaps only with prayer as the true foundation of it all. But each of them is valuable. Each of them is necessary. And over the course of this series, we're going to dig a little bit deeper into each of these steps. We've already done it for a couple, and we're doing another one today. 2 weeks ago, we looked at a step that we said was the easiest of all. Maybe not the easiest to do, but the easiest to understand and appreciate and say, yes, that's important. That's something I should do. We talked about the step of prayer, practicing prayer, and the celebration of the sacraments. Prayer is a conversation and an encounter with God that takes practice. The more we pray, the more likely we are to see fruit flowing from that time in prayer, and even, we could say, success. Prayer changes our world, and it changes our world perhaps most fundamentally because it changes us. We attune and orient our desires to God and God's desires through prayer, through conversation with God, and that changes the way we act as we allow His wisdom, His insight, and His direction to penetrate our heart and transform our life. Last week, we looked at what we said is perhaps for we Catholics the most challenging step of all, sharing our faith, and sharing it not just with the people beside us or in the same vicinity as us in the pews. We're not beside one another quite so much anymore. Sharing our faith not just with the people in the pews, but with people who really don't have an active living relationship, so far as we can see, with Christ and His church. Sharing our faith with them helps us to grow because it is a way in which we express our love for God and others. Love God, love your neighbor, Jesus said, love others. And as we share faith, we're doing both. Now, while sharing faith does seem a little intimidating if we haven't been down that road before, it doesn't have to be. And we talked last week about three simple ways that we could take, simple steps we could take to move in the direction of sharing faith. First, to identify someone. Who is it with whom we're going to share our faith? Identify that person, someone who does not seem, from all appearances at least, to have that living relationship with God and with the church. They're far from God, so far as the world can see. So you identify them, and then you invest in them. First and most fundamentally, through prayer. That is the foundation. Pray for that person. And then invest in them through relationship. You probably already have some sort of a relationship. Seek to deepen it. Seek to be someone they can count on. Seek to be someone they can trust, someone who will listen to them. Be with them when they're in need. Invest in them. Identify that person. Invest in that person. Finally, invite them. Invite them to join us, perhaps here on Sunday, perhaps online, so that they can draw nearer to the Lord by drawing nearer to His church. So I said we're going to do another step today, and the step that we're going to talk about today is the step of engaging in Christian community through a small group. And that might seem a little bit unusual in the sense that Christian community surely can't be defined solely and only as a small group, and we're not doing that. We're not defining it solely and only as a small group. But there's very good reason that a small group participation should be at the heart of our life of Christian community. And in order to explain why that is so, I'm going to take a step back, a step away even from Christian community into life, my life. Those of you who've been around the parish for a little while, and many of you have been here much longer than myself, but you've probably heard me talk a little bit, particularly last year, about the fact that I'm a fan of the Toronto Raptors, and I am. Once upon a time, though, in a galaxy far, far away, I was a fan of the Montreal Canadiens. Different sport, different team. And then, many decades ago still, my brother-in-law came into my life, or more precisely, he came into my sister's life, and through her, me. And together with her, he gave me the gift of my niece and my nephews. These are at the heart of my life of Christian community in a certain sort of way. And they all, through him, were basketball fans, Toronto Raptors fans, in fact. And for a few years, prior to my going to the seminary, we all lived in the same house. I spent so much time with them. And so finally, I became a basketball fan. Today, I could not tell you the last Montreal Canadiens game that I watched, but I still watch the Raptors regularly, every year. Now, the point of that story is when we spend time with people, we become more like them, whether we want to or not. I didn't decide one day I was going to become a Toronto Raptors fan. I was living with Toronto Raptors fans, and over time, their desires, their attractions became my own. And so the people in our lives pull us in their direction, and they influence us, either for good or bad. The influence is there either way. Peer pressure, a word that we associate with children and young people, isn't a teenager thing, it is a people thing. It can have its impact on us all. In fact, there is an old saying that goes like this: "Show me your friends, and I will show you your future." Your friends, who you choose to spend time with, will influence, if not perhaps even determine, the quality and the future direction of your life. And so this is a principle of life. And if it's a principle of life, it needs to be a principle of our faith and our growth in faith as well. It's something we need to leverage if we're going to be successful in life and if we're going to be growing spiritually. If you want to grow as a follower of Jesus Christ, you need people in your life, people close to you, who walk with you in your walk with the Lord. Spend time with them. Think about it. Our great-grandparents, if we're quite young, and for some of us not quite that far back, lived in a Christian culture. They came to church, to Mass on Sunday, they prayed, and then they went out into a world in which almost everyone went to church, almost everyone prayed. That was the world that they lived in. So whoever they spent their time with, they were reinforced in some way or another, directly or indirectly, in their Christian faith. We don't have that luxury. It's not the way it is. And so if church is the alpha and the omega, the beginning and the end of your Christian faith, if the only contact you really have with other Christians is once a week here, a couple times a month, and the rest of your time you're just not choosing to do anything evil, you're just living life. But you are, as you do that, immersed in a completely secularized and post-Christian culture, a culture that is actually even quite hostile to our faith. If you do that, you are more or less trying to live your faith all alone and on your own. And that is something very difficult to do. Any great accomplishment in life is difficult on our own. So too is growing spiritually. Now, it's good. It's in fact great to be part of a parish community, a big church like St. Pius, to be part of something significant. But it is also easy, and those of us who have been here for a number of years should remember this, it's also easy to get lost in the crowd. People who engage and come to us for the first time, who do they know? Where's their community? Everyone needs to be known, to be loved, and to be supported in life and in faith. Without a Christ-centered friendship, or several of them, our walk of faith, our journey of faith, will most certainly be slower and more wavering, less steady. And we are, along the way, far more likely to fall and to fail. When we have friendships in which Christ is at the heart, we connect with him in a way that we're far less likely to when we're walking on our own. That's because faith, your faith, my faith, is personal, most definitely, but it is not private. We grow in faith relationally. We need, to put it more simply, friends in faith. And so we've chosen to adopt a strategy here at St. Pius of intentionally assisting you to make that choice and to develop and grow in friendship with those who share your faith. And that strategy is, we're calling it small groups. Now, I mentioned previously that it's not completely unique. Anytime a group of Christians get together regularly, maybe it's even for another purpose, if they spend time together and they have full and free discussion, there's going to be some of the things that would go on in a small group that happen, there's no doubt. But small groups are intended and created specifically to foster and to deepen and to develop the kind of friends in faith, the kind of relationships that we need to be influenced in the right direction so that we can all deepen our faith, to grow spiritually. And a small group does that, as I say, by choice and by design. Small groups, as we intend them to be here at St. Pius, is basically exactly as the name implies. It's a small group of people who meet on a regular basis. It might be once a week, it might be twice a month. And the meetings have a very simple structure. Like any time a group of people come together, there's a bit of time spent at the beginning sort of catching up and finding out what each other have been up to, a little chit-chat. Then there is prayer. And because you join a small group doesn't mean that you have to be the one to lead everyone in prayer. You don't suddenly have to become a pastor or something like that because you're in a small group. It's not necessary. So we come together, we share what's been going on in our lives, we pray, and then the main content is typically watching some sort of a video, which is going to contain some sort of teaching, some sort of reflection about faith. And then together, responding to that, sometimes with structured questions that are asked to us, and we share our answers to learn from one another our responses and our insights from that teaching, what it says to us. Now, this doesn't happen at church, but it's still church, just a different kind of church. On Sundays here at church, you listen to me, I hope. In small groups, it's your turn to share, to listen to each other and deepen your faith. Now, as a concept, small groups are incredibly simple. There's not much to it. And yet, they help us to form connections and relationships that, as I have discussed, are incredibly helpful in influencing us and to our growing spiritually as a follower of Jesus Christ. The past few weeks, our second reading has been from St. Paul's letter to the Thessalonians. And ordinarily, that would have continued today, but as we mentioned, we're celebrating All Saints' Day today, so we heard a completely different set of readings, wonderful in themselves. But there is a single verse from Paul's letter to the Thessalonians that would have been proclaimed today that I just can't quite bring myself to give up, even though the readings were different. It perfectly captures the essence of small groups and what we hope they will accomplish for you in your life. Now, just a bit of background on the letter. Paul was a missionary, and so he traveled around the known world, proclaiming the gospel and bringing people to faith in Jesus and establishing churches. And after the church or the local community was up and running, he'd move on to the next city and repeat the process. But in a number of cases, in many we suspect, he followed up with sending letters back to the places he had left behind and the people he had left behind, offering them ongoing instruction and encouragement in faith. And he wrote 2 such letters to the church in Thessalonica. We've been hearing from one of them the last few weeks. And so this passage that I can't give up, this passage that speaks perfectly to the small group experience, is from that letter, and it's where Paul reminds the people he has left behind about the special relationship that they still share. He says this: "So deeply do we care for you that we are determined to share with you not only the gospel of God, but our own selves, because you have become very dear to us." Now, we all come to faith with different perspectives, different backgrounds and experiences. My relationship with God, my walk of faith is different and distinct from yours. Each of us has some unique perspective that we can share with others, whether we've grown up in the church and have taken our faith seriously for many decades, or whether we're just getting into it. Each of you, have something to offer others about faith. And as you contribute your insights and questions, and others contribute theirs in this time together, mutual growth, spiritual growth, can happen. We can influence one another through friendship into a deeper relationship with Christ. Small groups in a Catholic setting are not what we're used to. They're not the pastor sitting at the front teaching or someone else sitting at the front teaching. They're not adult education. They are about life change, and life change in an organic, almost invisible way through relationship. Small groups are about life change, and that is what Paul was talking about in that quote that I just read you. We are determined, he wrote to the Thessalonians, we are determined to share with you our own selves. Sharing life, sharing faith. That's what Paul was doing, and that's what we need to be doing. Small groups are an opportunity to do that, to share life, to share our wins and our losses, the troubles and challenges that are part of your life right now. And that is a gift in itself, because when you share a joy with others, the joy is doubled. And when you help by listening to carry another's hurt or heartache, you lighten their burden, you lighten their load. And there's more benefits. Small groups are also a little bit like insurance. You invest in them so that when you hit the storms of life, you have the support and friendships in place that you need to weather the storm. And you won't even have to ask for that support. It'll be there for you. Now, small groups can help you find friends in faith, and that can help your spiritual growth wherever you are on your journey at this moment. But like all good things, small groups are not always easy. I don't want to pretend that they are. There's a normal range of human personalities and ways of being that sometimes make things challenging. And at this particular moment in our lives and in our world, they are especially challenging because, as we know if we look around the church today, not everybody is ready yet to meet in person, whether it be at church or in a small group, even if all the appropriate precautions are taken. We understand that. And for that reason, we're going to begin with just one group and a little time-limited pilot project. And we're beginning this Wednesday evening at 7 online. And we're going to use something we've been talking about the last number of weeks here at Mass, the Search video series. Now, I've had the opportunity already to use that. We used it in the first meeting of our RCIA group this year. And when I made that point about whoever you are and wherever you are on your journey, you have something to share, I can attest to that from experience. We had a wonderful discussion, and some of these people know absolutely nothing about our faith, and yet they shared things that I found quite profound. Everyone has something to contribute, and so we're going to give you the opportunity to do that, to support one another and create friends in faith. And we're going to do it Wednesday evenings for 7 weeks at 7 p.m. So we're calling it 7 by 7. And if you want to participate, all you need is that search registration, a copy of the participant's guide, which you can get at the welcome desk after Mass. Or you can just go to if you've already got that, you could go to the website, click on Serve, and there's a form there where you have the option to sign up for the 7 by 7 pilot project for small groups. 7 Wednesdays at 7 p.m. for about an hour. That's all it takes. It could be the beginning of something wonderful in your life. Now, I know that some of you here today and some of you watching online are ready for this. Sounds great. You're ready to try, but most likely not all of you. Some of you are quite hesitant. So today, I'm mostly trying for you to plant some seeds, to spark a little bit of reflection on this, the influence of our friends in our life and the direction we want our life to go, and whether or not our life is taking us in that direction. Life change is important. But it's true, decisions about life change can sometimes take some time. So for most of you today, be you here or watching online, I'm asking you just to think about it, as I said, to reflect on the influence of friends on yourself and your life and the direction that your life is going, to think about the benefits of spiritual growth, and we talked about them at the beginning of today's message, and the benefits of sharing life and conversation with others, particularly friends in faith. And then, in the new year, we're going to start something a little bit bigger, a parish-wide small group program that we're going to invite everyone to participate in. And you can get into a group then, and we're hoping to get that going just in time for Lent, which for we Catholics is a perfect time to focus on spiritual growth. Now, the Gospel for All Saints' Day, the Gospel that we actually heard proclaimed today, in that Gospel, the Lord paints a picture, we could say, of a world turned upside down. Blessed, he says, are those who mourn. What's up with that? Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who are persecuted. I don't think so. It's all a bit confusing. It's a bit of a shock. But it isn't the only shock we find in the Gospels. In the Gospel that would normally have been read today, he does the same thing, talking to the people. He tells us that the greatest among you must be your servant. Whoever exalts himself will be humbled, but whoever humbles himself will be exalted, will be raised up, will be lifted up on high. In other words, if you want to turn your life right side up, Jesus says, try turning it upside down. That's really what he says. And so we can ask ourselves, how am I doing? In what ways am I lifting others up? Am I serving others around me? In what ways am I acting with real humility and actually allowing others to serve me? The Lord says this is the very best way to live. And small groups are a great place to start.